one of the things that you will have to make decisions about in your ministry is whose wedding you will perform. And weddings are always tricky. Uh, I'm going to confess to you my bias, and that is I hate weddings. Hate them with a passion. I love marriage. I like premarital counseling. I like helping married couples be married well. But the wedding ceremony itself is just absolute misery to me, probably because it takes up so much time. It's not as simple as just showing up and marrying somebody. You're committing to the rehearsal. Typically, they want the pastor at the rehearsal dinner. You do the wedding. They want you to stay around for pictures. Then they don't want you to do the reception. So that's a weekend shot in my book, right there. Friday and Saturday both taken. One year at Ashland Avenue, I did 26 weddings. That averages every other week, and I just hated that. So I don't enjoy weddings. I think the good thing about being in a larger church is people ask you to do fewer weddings. Frankly, they ask other staff, and that's great. I'm never offended when they ask somebody else to do weddings, but you're going to have to do them. You know, that's just part of it. It is part of being a pastor. I'm going to predict, though, that over the course of your ministry, you're going to end up doing fewer of them because more and more, it seems to me, weddings are getting separated from the church. Now, part of that is what's happening in our culture about marriage, but you're going to have to think through this. Again, this is one of those things where I want you to come up with a wedding policy for whom you will marry and who you will not. And you need to come up with that and have a written policy so that you can give that to people, but really before you have to make a decision. So the best way for it to work is you have a written wedding policy and your church has a written wedding policy about the building. And when someone calls and says, hey, we'd like pastor to marry us on such and such a date, that you send them, that you have your secretary or somebody, or you send them all this packet of information and tell them to read over this, and if they still want to talk about it, to call you back. So if they call and they say, we'd like to get married at Buck Run, we send them a packet, and it's got all the church policy and tells them, you know, what our rules are and how much it costs. That is a separate decision from whether or not I will marry them or any other staff member. So you've got two things, the building use and then your policy. You need to have those as separate things in your mind. So if you're pastoring a church, you need to make it clear to to the church that your policy for whom you marry is yours. The church really doesn't get a say in that. They sort of need to understand that. But you need to respect that the church's policy is theirs. So the church might be less restrictive about who can get married in the building than you are, or they might be more. But it's their policy. If you pastor a church that is at a scenic spot, like our old building was right by a waterfall at the forks of the Elkhorn, and it was just the most picturesque place, and people wanted to have their weddings at our building, so you got to decide, are you willing to let people who aren't members of your church use your building and come in and do that? And there are benefits both ways. But frankly, you can very easily get sidetracked and find yourself running a wedding business, and you might as well go to Las Vegas and get more money from it. But your church has to decide, like, do they have to be a member to get married there, or can it be children of members, family members? Can anybody in the community rent your facility? If so, you're going to have to face the question about divorced people, gay people. I mean, all kinds of things. If you open up your building for public weddings outside of your membership, things can get a little bit dicey. So you need to have a wedding committee and comes up with a policy for that for your church. And then you need to have your policy for you. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and just interact with me here for a minute. Let's talk. Who here says you would only marry a believer to another believer? You would not marry a believer to an unbeliever. Anybody? Jay, you say that? You guys say that? You would not marry a believer to an unbeliever under any circumstance. All right? You willing to go out on that limb? Say that? You sure? Okay. I'll give you a situation I'm dealing with right now. So we have a lady coming to Buck Run, and she is living with a guy. She has 2 children with that guy. She has become a believer, and she wants to follow Christ. He's not a believer. They're not married. She wants to be obedient to the Lord. She's got 2 kids with this man. She comes to you and she says, Pastor, what do I need to do to be obedient to Christ? And you just tell me what you're going to tell her. She's already got 2 kids with him. And he is, by all accounts, a good father to his children, a good provider for her. They're not married. So you tell me what's your advice to her? And go to the courthouse. So you just kick the can to the state. You marry them. I think they ought to do it, but I'm not going to do it. What do you think? Okay, but now you're saying he claimed but you married them. They both claimed to be believers when you married them. Did she already have children with him? Okay, so I'm just curious. All right, so you married them, and after you married them, he started acting like what he is, which is not surprising, right? Uh, but you regret marrying them? Yeah, but she was already yoked to him. Yeah, she already had a child with him. You don't get more yoked than that. Yeah, well, I'm saying you have a baby together. You're in each other's life. You're in each other's life. Yeah. So, and I also don't know what else you would tell her. What would you tell her? If you didn't marry her, what would you tell her? I mean, here's your choices. Let's just look at your choices. Choice 1, leave him. Take your kids that are his and leave him. And you remove the children from a 2-parent home. In the name of Jesus, you have a 1-parent home. I don't know what you've accomplished there. You've told these kids that following Jesus means losing your dad. They had a dad. Now their mom has left their dad. I don't know. I don't know how. I mean, first of all, I don't see that in Scripture. Second, let me go through my choices. All right, other choice is they just stay as they are. So they stay unmarried because you won't marry them. And she wants to be obedient to the Lord. She's serious about the Lord, but you just say, well, he's not a believer, so you can't marry him. I mean, her only choice is there. She leaves him or she stays with him. Or, third, let's say is he willing to marry her? If he's willing to marry her, so those are your three choices. My question is, why wouldn't you marry her to him? Because, I admit there are competing values here. So we put a value on believers being married to believers, but Paul doesn't instruct. He says, in the case of a person who becomes a believer after they're married, if they're pleased to dwell with you, dwell with them. Don't leave them. 1 Corinthians 7, pretty much the theme of 1 Corinthians 7 is serve God where you are. So whatever situation you're saved in, use that to serve the Lord. So if she is saved in this situation and wants now to do the right thing, I think the least bad thing is for them to marry. You don't get an ideal thing here because that ship sailed a long time ago. You're trying to find the least bad thing. And the least bad thing, I think, is that they marry. And if I'm going to tell them to marry, I think it's disingenuous of me to say, you go to somebody else and get married. I think you ought to get married, but I won't do it. So I think you did the right thing. You're not responsible for what he does. I think what you really regret is what he did, not that you married them, because I don't know what difference that would have made. Yeah. Yeah, but those children, I don't think Jesus asked them to be fatherless, and which is in essence what they are if you take the dad out of the home. Again, the ship has already sailed. They're already yoked together with children. That's a yoke. So here's the question: is marriage for Christians or is marriage for humanity? What do you think? Whom does God give this? What do you say? Yeah. Yeah. And Jesus, you're right, but let's just look at it. What does Jesus say? Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Is he talking only about Christian marriages there? Are Christian marriages the only ones God puts together? And, I think every marriage is put together by God. The teaching of Scripture, I think divorce is bad for unbelievers as well as for believers. I think the marriage covenant is for unbelievers as well as for believers. It's a gift to humanity. Now, for Christians, there's a deeper meaning. This is what Paul says in Ephesians 5, that he speaks concerning Christ and the church. He said, this is a profound mystery. Now, the word mystery has a technical meaning in the New Testament. It's something that was previously hidden, but now in Christ is revealed. And so all of humanity can see God's design from creation, really. And no matter how much our current culture wants to deny this, facts are stubborn things. And frankly, I think 40 years from now, I don't think you'll have the confusion you have now because this just isn't going to work. It just doesn't work. DNA and human anatomy are stubborn things, aren't they? And so we're doing this grand experiment now in cultures, and it's not going to work ultimately. It's going to ruin a lot of lives along the way. But ultimately, you got men and you got women, and all of humanity can see God's design in the human body and in DNA. And they can look back, basically, from creation, from the founding of the world. even in cultures that have accepted homosexuality, they've protected marriage. I mean, like ancient Greece. But you and I can look forward. We look forward to consummation, not just creation. We look forward not only to God's design, but to our destiny. And so for us, marriage has an added dimension, which it is about Christ and the church. Now, an unbeliever can't get that part. An unbeliever is not going to understand that. But in the case where there are already children, I think the least bad thing is for you to marry them. And this is where you really coach. In this case, it's a wife. In my case, at Buck Run, it's a woman. To live 1 Peter 3 and to try and win him without the word by her behavior, by being an incredible wife to him and praying over him, and pray that the children are sanctified by the believing parent. But I think it's a worse thing to remove the one parent from the home because one of the parents got saved. I think you've got to marry them. Now, let me just say this. The gospel is going to get you into really messy situations, and our world is messier than ever, and you're going to have to sort through these things. Now, I throw this out to you because this is a real-life situation. Here, I threw out my example, and you say you've had it too. You're going to face things that, like my dad's generation, would never even have thought of facing. People who transgendered are going to be saved in our churches. And we're going to have to think through these things. And you're going to have to figure out how you're going to deal with it and what are your values. So like in this one, I've got a priority of values. Would I ordinarily marry a believer to an unbeliever? Not ordinarily, but when there are children already present, I go, okay, I think this is less bad for me to marry them so that the children have parents, and I want her to be able to be obedient. You know, and I don't think she's obedient by depriving the children of their father. I don't think that makes her more obedient. See, this is not like if they don't have children, okay, if they don't have children, I'm going to say, this is where you're willing to suffer. And you follow Christ and you move out and you be on your own. But if they do, then okay, I think now the least bad thing is to marry them. So there are always exceptions. Do you think you would marry divorced people? Or do you think you would ever help somebody get a divorce? You ever think you think you'd ever help somebody get a divorce? Let me tell you another story. This is sort of a long story, but I just hope it will help you as you think through, again, the messy situations the gospel gets you into. In Frankfurt, there are two McDonald's, one on the east side, one on the west side. And Frankfurt is a two-side town. It's really weird. It's like there's no middle Frankfurt. It's sort of downtown, but it's just weird. And so when Buck Run is on the east side of Frankfurt, the McDonald's on the east side of Frankfurt burned down, and burned down right before Christmas. It was like the two Sundays before Christmas. One of my deacons comes to me and he says, "You know, the McDonald's burned down." Yeah, I know the McDonald's burned down. He said, "Well, you know, most of those workers are Hispanic," and he said, they're on minimum wage. And think about it, right before Christmas, they've lost their jobs because they're not going to be able to rebuild it for 6 months. And he said, "We need to do something to help those people." I'm like, "Yeah, Tim, buddy, I appreciate your heart, but next Sunday, we've only got one Sunday before Christmas, and that's our Lottie Moon offering Sunday. And we've really pushed Lottie Moon and I think at that time our goal was $70,000. And I was like, man, people are going to have to dig deep to give $70,000. And I really don't want people cutting into their Lottie Moon in order to give, take up an offering for the McDonald's workers. I want to help them, but I don't know that we can pull this off before Christmas." He said, Pastor, if you ask people to give and not cut into their Lottie Moon, but to cut into their own Christmas and to give, to help those people, they'll do it because you ask. But you have to ask. He said, and if you ask, my wife and I will give the first $2,000. And we won't cut into our Lottie Moon offering to do it. As I say, it's terribly inconvenient when your deacons are more spiritual than you are. And so I was like, okay, well, we'll figure out what we're going to do. So that week, we put out a one call. We could make one phone call to everybody, and we put out a one call to our whole church and said, Sunday, in addition to the Lottie Moon offering, we're going to take up an offering for the McDonald's workers. Those people have served us, and we want to serve them. Sunday night, instead of services at church like we normally have, we're going to have a banquet for the McDonald's workers, and we're going to serve them. So come prepared Sunday to give 2 offerings. I didn't know how it would go. That Sunday, not only did we reach our Lottie Moon goal, we also had a $10,000 offering for the McDonald's workers. And we had gotten in touch with the owner and contacted all the McDonald's workers. And so that night, there were about 150 people who came to this banquet, McDonald's workers and their families. And some of them came in, they were tatted up with curse words, and a lot of them were Hispanic. Some didn't speak English. One of my deacons was Puerto Rican, and he translated everything I said. We welcomed them. We served them. We loved on them. And and then when it was over, we said, we've got another gift for you. We gave each of them $150 gift cards to Walmart and Kroger so they could get things for their Christmas. These people were just blown away. They were overwhelmed with our love and compassion and tears streaming down their face. One guy came up to me, just an old rough guy. He said, I don't go to church. I haven't been to church since I was a little boy. I'm probably never going to go to church. But if I do, it'll be this one. I said, I'll take that, man. That's a good word. So that was Sunday before Christmas. I think Christmas was like on a Tuesday or something that year. A week later, on, I want to say New Year's Day, maybe New Year's Eve, right there, one of those 2 days, 5 o'clock in the morning, a couple that had been at that dinner that night, Hispanic couple, Honduran, walked out of their apartment building at 5 o'clock in the morning. Selwyn was going to take Mata to work. They were letting her work at the West Side McDonald's. And so he was taking her there at 5 o'clock in the morning, but there were 3 guys in the parking lot with guns. And they shot Selwyn in the stomach, and they took Mata out in the countryside, and they raped her. They kept her clothes. She had to go find a farmhouse, totally naked, knocked on the door. She spoke no English. They obviously understood what had happened. And by then, police had already found Selwyn and is just dying in his own blood. They flew him by helicopter to the UK Med Center in Lexington and were saving his life. They were able to get information out of Mata, took her to UK. So the day after New Year's, when the paper was published in Frankfurt, it told about that crime, and it did not tell the names of the victims for obvious reasons, but it did tell that he worked at Buffalo Trace Distillery and she worked at McDonald's, that she was on the way to McDonald's. A lady from Buck Run read that article in the paper, and she said, I know who this is. They were at dinner at Buck Run. And Debbie goes to Lexington, to the UK Med Center, and gets somebody there to violate the HEPA laws and tell her where Selwyn is. By then, he's already had surgery. In fact, he would have, something like 10 surgeries. Debbie goes into the room, and she finds Mata there. And Debbie doesn't speak Spanish, and Mata doesn't speak English, but Debbie gets in her face, and Mata recognizes her from the dinner. And Debbie just basically conveys to her, you don't need to worry about anything. I'm here to take care of you. And she just moves into that room, and she becomes Mata's best friend. I can remember that next Sunday. She brought Mata to Buck Run. And brought her forward. About 40 of our ladies just surrounded her and prayed for her. Mata didn't understand a word that was being spoken, but she understood everything that was happening. And our church, and especially Debbie and Dave, they just ministered to them, and they cared for them, and they loved them. Now, do you think those people are going to fall in love with the Jesus that motivates all this love to them? I'm telling you, they did. And they trusted Christ. And I got to share with Debbie, brought him to my office, and Selwyn, this is after he's gone through multiple surgeries, and he speaks English fairly well. And I shared the gospel with him, and he would tell Mata. They were anxious to receive the Lord, and they trusted the Lord. And they said, now we know we need to be baptized. And in the course of the conversation, I discovered that Mata is still technically married to a guy in Honduras. She and Selwyn have been together for years and years. They've got one bank account. You know, they're in every way husband and wife, except she's still technically married to a guy in Honduras and has children with him. And she's sending money back to Honduras to take care of these girls. But he won't give her a divorce because he fears that if he does, she won't send money anymore. And man, just sorting through that. What's the least bad thing? What do I do? They said, we want to get married. And by the way, there's no going back to the guy in Honduras because he's got another family. He's with another woman. He's got children with this other woman. So he doesn't want her. He just wants her money. And man, this is just a messy situation. This is where the gospel takes you. What's the least bad thing to do? And she had been trying to get a legal divorce from the Honduran government, which is sort of a mess, but couldn't do it. They wanted to marry. They said, we want to serve the Lord together. We want to be baptized. And what do you do? Well, I'll tell you what I did. You can disagree with it. You're free to. But we baptized them. And our people helped took them to Chicago once, to the Honduran consulate there. Ended up helping get the daughters out of Honduras back up here, and they moved up here with them. And he finally gave the divorce when she would take the daughters, and I married them. But I couldn't tell them. I mean, there was nothing in them disobedient. There was nothing in them that said, well, we've trusted Christ, but now we won't do what Christ has told us to do. They wanted to be married. They wanted to serve the Lord. And by the way, that happened, I don't know how many years ago. They're still there. They're still a big part of our church. Faithful members come about every week. And the Lord has, through them, many others have come to the Lord. So you're going to get in those situations. And I don't think it's clean and neat when you just say, well, you're divorced. And you can't tell her, oh, you should go back to this guy in Honduras. He doesn't want her. He's got another wife, not legally, but he's with another woman, kids with that woman. There's no putting Humpty Dumpty back together. You're just going to get in more and more of those situations, guys. It's messy out there. And it's not clean and neat like, oh, you got to get married, or, oh, you just move out from him. I mean, with kids involved, boy, it is hard to know what to do. And this is why you've got to think through ahead. And we prayed about it. I talked to my deacons, and they were like, Pastor, are they willing to get married? I said, man, they're willing to get married today. They want to get married today. The moment it's legal for them to get married, they will. He's preventing them from doing it. He doesn't want her back. He won't take her back. There's no going back. It's only moving forward. How do we do that? And we did it. And I married them. We helped them. We helped her obtain the divorce, and I married them. Am I happy about any of that? No, but I'm at peace with it. It's messy. But there was no neat. And I grew up, it was just all clean and neat. Divorce was wrong. You don't marry unbelievers. There wasn't all this spider web of everything being connected. Now, it's just so many moving pieces. And you can't tell these people, oh, Jesus doesn't want you. There's no way for you to serve the Lord. You're damaged goods. No, there's a way forward. And again, I really looked at 1 Corinthians 7 as the model where Paul talks about all these situations. Are you saved in this way? Well, serve the Lord there. If you're a slave, don't seek to be free. If you get your freedom, use it for the Lord. But if you remain a slave, serve the Lord in your slavery. Now, is that an endorsement of slavery? No, it is not. I will argue to the death that that's not an endorsement of slavery. It's Paul saying, when you are saved in a broken world, you serve God in that broken world in the way that you can. He says, are you single? Seek not a wife. Don't think that a change in your circumstance is going to help you. That's the magic wand that's suddenly going to make you able to serve the Lord. So I think we have to have that view when we deal with people. Okay, if there's a clear sin, they're in a state of sin, cease the sin. But if they're in the remnants of the brokenness of the past that you can't erase, then figure out, how do we serve God even with the tentacles from the past still reaching into the present? How can we do that? And you're going to face that more and more. So I throw that out at the very beginning to say, I want you to develop a policy for whom you will marry and whom you will not. But I also want to tell you, you're going to encounter things that don't fit your policy. So my written policy is I don't marry divorced people. But there have been several times where I thought it was the least bad thing, and I did it. And my written policy is I won't marry a believer to an unbeliever. But there have been a few times where it was the least bad thing, and I broke my own policy. Remember, it's my policy. It's not handed down from Mount Sinai. It's what I think is the best application of it. But if you will write it out, then when somebody calls the church, hey, we want you to marry us, and your secretary or you can say, I'm going to send you my policy. I want you to read that. And then after you read that, if you still want to talk to me about it, you call me. And what you want to avoid is them sitting across the desk from you and you having to say no when they think it's personal. There's just something about a written policy that gives it an impersonal nature, so they don't take it. They're not as offended as when you just say, no, I won't marry you, when they say, oh, this is his policy. You have to think through also things like, alcohol. If you're in a church that pretty much has a teetotal perspective, will you participate in a wedding where they serve alcohol? Is that just another headache you're going to get? You're going to have to explain to people. I mean, again, that's your policy. You need to think through these things. Divorce, the music in weddings, that probably needs to be a part of your church's policy. Like, what music is acceptable? We have as part of our policy that whoever our worship leader is, that our worship pastor has to approve, or one of the pastors has to approve the music that's played, because I'm not against all secular music, but some secular music is just downright ungodly. And I want something ungodly. I don't want music that drops the F-bomb or something, it played in our church. And so, and I've learned you can't trust people to have good judgment. You cannot. You're going to have to make sure that good judgment is exercised. So a policy that clearly states your position is going to help you, so you're not always having to get people upset with you. Now, I would tell you, even if you say you won't marry divorced people, the one exception you should make is if people who've divorced each other are remarrying each other. That would always be a good thing. Although I've actually had it happen where there was a marriage in between those two things. So man, it really gets messy.